Big Ten Media Days are in the books. I'm your host, Thomas Frank Carr. We're going to be answering your questions about yesterday, the day before, the past week, and of course, getting into some training camp preview and season preview on the BWI Daily Mailbag Edition. Welcome to the BWI Mailbag. I'm your host, Thomas Frank Carr. Nate Bauer on location, looking like he's living his best life today. Nate, appreciate you on location coming to us to answer the people's questions. You are truly a champion of the people in your chalet somewhere in an undisclosed location.
You know, I think we're going to call it a chateau, but but yes, it's fairly spectacular at my undisclosed location here in the mountains of the Hudson Valley. I've been corrected. I'm not allowed to call it the Hudson River Valley, even though that's what the sign driving in says, is I'm entering the Hudson River Valley. Okay. Apparently that's not what the people say. That's not what they call it.
So did the river carve the valley?
Yes.
Then okay, sure.
Okay. Listen, I'm a guest. I'm a guest.
Very fair. Very fair.
Know, I'm just gonna follow as the locals do, and so yeah, no, it's a little bit of a different backdrop today, right?
Yeah. Still wood though. Still, I mean, it's not shiplap, but it is still a nice, serene wood backdrop. So no matter what. I mean, Nate's always the classier person here on the show, as I have my bunny cage behind me and my air conditioner running in the window. And I still have yet to figure out how to pose the shot where you can't see all the garbage in my apartment. I like some of it, but not all of it. You know what I like more, though? I like getting right into it, getting to the BWI mailbag. So let's get into the best way to get to the BWI mailbag, by the way, is to subscribe to BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. $1 for 12 months of access gets you inside the lines and message forum, where I post the call every Wednesday night for the mailbag. Thursday morning, we wrap it up and then we record. So make sure you get in BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, $1. And then we do take some select questions from social media, either from here on the YouTube channel, some previous videos, or of course from Twitter. So those are the ways to get here, but the best way, the most direct way, and I answer every single question I can from the message board. So that's your best way to get your question answered here on the show. Okay, Nate, let's get to our first question. And normally we have like an opening sort of conversation about some of the stuff that's happened this week, but everyone's on it. Like our viewers are smart people, and they're asking the right questions. So Beaverman72 asks, what's your projected ideal 2 deep along the defensive line? Mine has changed since yesterday, Nate. PJ Mustipher, the news from Big Ten Media Day. I think the main headline that everyone's going to take from that, PJ Mustipher cleared for training camp, passed his conditioning test. I'm still not totally sold. Are you?
No.
Okay,
nope.
Great.
I mean, look, does he want to do everything? The man, PJ Mustipher, does he want to do everything? Does he feel like he's capable of doing everything? Does he feel like, having that mindset is necessary to get past an injury like this? Yeah. I would say that the answer is yes to all of those. But I would still push back slightly in saying that I'll be stunned if Penn State doesn't ease him into this. If the coaching staff, if the medical staff, if all of the I hate to put it this way, but like the grown-ups in the room, right?
Right.
And PJ, you're a grown-up. I get it.
He's a fully grown man and a half.
Yeah. I'm just saying the people who are tasked with keeping these guys safe, keeping these guys healthy, I would just from every point of view, right? It just makes sense. He knows what he's capable of doing. They know what he's capable of doing. He's got to be top notch when the season starts. And so if it's not a slow rollout, I would be very, very surprised, despite what he might want to do and feel like he's capable of doing.
Yeah. there's a couple of things that play in here, and this is what I wrote yesterday when we were talking about this particular topic after he talked to Greg Pickle and some of the other reporters at Media Day in Indianapolis. He talked about, the conditioning test and being ready, and also the players and the inspirational figures that he saw that pushed him through that process, and talking about Adrian Peterson, talking about Jeffrey Simmons of the Tennessee Titans, who came back from an ACL injury in February, played in I think by the middle of his rookie season in the NFL. A very, very comparable situation. I think that's why PJ was feeling the way he was about that player. If he was considering going to the NFL draft last year, he would have without the injury. None of those players played well when they came back. They were never really player that they were supposed to be until the year after.
Yep.
So him being available and him starting training camp 9 days before the 9-month anniversary of that injury, which is always, that's the window from when players are generally expected to be cleared after an ACL injury, which, by the way, he also finally confirmed that's what it was. So we can finally drop the reportedly.
We can talk about it. Yeah.
Finally talk about it. He tore his ACL. All of those things make me still cautious of, he can technically be there, but what version of PJ Mustipher is it?
Yeah. Isn't that the question? Is adjusting the expectations of what the top end can be for him. That's it. And we talk about this all the time. Maybe PJ Mustipher at 80% is enough. Maybe right? If the talent is there and otherwise he's that much of a presence and that much of a help to what Penn State wants to do on the defensive line, that you'll take your recuperating defensive tackle, who is kind of the stalwart, the anchor of that unit, at less than, because it's okay. That's
right.
That's all right. That 80% is better. It's just a matter of what is that number. You know, if I'm talking about 80%, like, yeah, it sounds like a win. If it's maybe 66%,
right,
then that's a different story. And honestly, if it's 90%, then that's great. That's a win. That's where you want to be. And it becomes kind of a no-brainer decision to make in terms of how many reps he gets, what kind of a workload you put on him, and how you treat him through the course of the season.
Yeah. And he mentioned during the conditioning test, it's always been easy for him, and he was struggling through it this time. So there's two things, and I want to bring up Saquon Barkley here, because this is a guy we've talked about during this conversation with PJ Mustipher. For me to illustrate my point is, this offseason, you've heard so many people taking shots at Barkley and the type of runner he is, and the type of player he is, because he had a down season last year, because he was coming off an ACL and he got injured again during the season. And when you're an athlete, and this is a side note, but when you're an athlete like Barkley, and there are some flaws in your game, which I've pointed out for most of his career, but you're so talented, it works in the NFL anyway. The minute those skills are eroded, we start to see, like, the cracks. With Mustipher, I'm concerned about that. But the good news, and I'll give you the other side of the coin, is that he is going to be at training camp, and he will have that impact and that concussive force on his body before the first game. He's not coming back in the middle of the season. He's going to have training camp to acclimate to some of those things and find out where the weak points or the stress points are. But to your point about, and bringing it all home about Barkley and comparing, PJ Mustipher is a defensive tackle. He was not doing squats this offseason. Like, I watched him doing rehab squats. So I don't know what he's been doing in the summer, but if you're not allowed to be in the tug of war at Lift for Life, I just can't imagine that you're really going to be 90%, 95, 100% of the guy that you were until you get into that cycle. And Barkley last season, because he was rehabbing, didn't have the explosiveness to make him a great back. Those two things are connected. And Noah Cain is the same way from last year. We saw the result of that. I think he's going to be a valuable resource, but I'm still concerned about early in the season expecting too much of him.
I think it is this pretty stark contrast between what, and I don't think there is a person alive who has met or interacted with PJ Mustipher who isn't rooting for him.
Right.
Right? Like
Right.
he is the man.
By the
Just
way,
a
this is me
great
rooting
dude.
for him of like, lay
Yeah.
off. If you
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
see PJ Mustipher, lay off, because it's not like he has this is not his fault. Like,
Yep.
just give the dude a minute. That's
No, so,
how I feel about this.
but at the same time, he's going to set that bar for himself as high as he
Right.
possibly can. And so
Yep.
it's just a matter of the public and everyone else kind of going into it with an open mind, right? Of, hey, if he comes back and is as good as he was before the injury, then that should be a spectacular story, right? It
I
should
want to
be
know
framed.
everything.
Correct. It should be
Yeah.
framed in that context of, this is incredible that he's able to do this. And if he's not, that's okay. That's right. That is what should be expected. Just given the nature of the injury and the timing of it.
Yeah. And I do think that so he is a fifth-year player. He's a physically mature player. He's done a lot of work to get his body to a place where it can bounce back quickly from a muscular standpoint, from a physical standpoint. So if he gets into the season and during the routine lifting that you do during the season, which is kind of a maintenance thing, if he gets some sort of residual rebound effect, I think that's also a reasonable thing. But it's going to be September, middle September, maybe getting towards that year anniversary of the injury. And there's going to be a couple games in there where Penn State fans might go, so anyway, let's move on from PJ and let's look at the rest of the question. I don't know. I want to go through a full ideal too deep along the defensive line, but who are the factors at each position? Maybe give me the names that you think are going to be in the too deep without having to rank them or list them, starting at defensive end. By the way, we're going to be doing a season preview of this next week, so we'll give you more detail then.
I think that I would be surprised if Tarburton doesn't start.
Yeah.
And then I don't know with Adisa and Chop Robinson. I feel like that kind of could be either or.
Is there an appreciable difference between the two in terms of skill set?
Yeah, I don't know. Honestly, I mean, look, like you and I are in the same place here in that we're not there. We don't get to see it. We can hear from people. We can hear reactions. And yes, by all accounts, Chop Robinson has had a good acclimation. James Franklin talked about it yesterday at Big Ten Media Days. Those are positive signs. Is he stand in better immediately than what Adisa Isaac represents, also coming back from injury? I don't know. I mean, my supposition is that that's going to be a battle, right? That there will be some level of competition there as to who fulfills that other spot. And then I think Smith Vilbert and, a guy like Dani Dennis Sutton will have an opportunity to battle there and compete there as well. I mean, like, I've laid it out dozens of times now this offseason, but that's a spot where traditionally true freshmen have the best impact at that level, at his elite level of recruiting, can make an impact, and it can do so immediately. So
speaking of the too deep, it might go a little bit deeper than that. If you look at maybe that fourth spot is split between two people, right? And then eventually those reps change over time if and when somebody separates themselves or players prove that they aren't quite where you want them to be. Like there's also maybe it doesn't raise, maybe there's some guys that fall back. I think you can read the defensive tackle position the same way, where maybe Mustipher technically starts at the one tech, which I still need to confirm. Like, is there a difference between these two positions? It seems like there is, but it seems
Franklin called him a nose yesterday. Right?
Yeah.
He laid that out fairly clearly. So that would be.
It just seems like the skill set between the two doesn't matter as much as it did previously. And Mustipher is one of the few guys that truly has skills of one and maybe not skills of the other. He's quick, but I wouldn't call him a 3 technique. So just interesting that situation. You might see him technically as the starter, but he might be splitting reps with a guy like Jordan Vandenberg, and Devon Ellies might be eating most of those snaps to start. And then that might cycle through however it plays out. And then that 3 technique, that's the one where I think there's the biggest competition between the 3 names at the top of Izzard, Beeman, and Durant. And, I'm presuming then that Vandenberg is a one tech in the situation. But like I said, during the spring, I don't know whether it was injuries or whether it was experimentation. You had two guys that I would call three techs on the field at the same time playing those positions. So I think there's a lot of things that we need to learn about that before we know the two deep specifically.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I mean, the only name I would bring up, and we brought it up all off season, but I think you have to do it again, is Zane Durant.
Yep.
Just Akeem Beeman, Keziah Izzard, they're on notice, and that's what they want. That's what
right.
That's the type of environment that Penn State's trying to foster, right? At every position, but specifically there. I mean, I think that if you have that level of talent, that level that shows itself and does so consistently from a young age, they're going to get those guys on the field. They're going to find a way, and it might come at the cost of some reps for guys who are expected otherwise to be in that position.
Yeah. I mean, look at Smith Vilbert is in that situation right now very clearly. Like he is that has already happened to him, and it's up to him to prove that he is worth it, that he's better than those other players that have come in this offseason and that he can make those plays. Seems like Media Day was a real success, says Nittany JP. Do you think this puts some of the Sean Clifford? You can throw any reference and get it by me, and I don't know if it's appropriate or not. I don't know, and I'm not very old in the brain. Norma Ray controversy in the rearview mirror. Do you know what that is, Nate? I found out recently. I was saying things on camera that were, and I didn't realize
entirely inappropriate.
Yeah, and people snuck those things by me. I have kind of blinders sometimes. Anyway, in the rearview mirror, and that, by the way, that shouldn't be that. You should try that. Please don't try that. So anyway, let me restart.
It looks like it's about unionization.
Okay. Good. Thank you. So are we putting this in the rear? Okay. All right. Are we putting this in the mirror, the rearview mirror, or will we have to know the full impact of this in a couple of weeks? This is something you and I have talked about a little bit off camera, and I want to bring this conversation here because I thought, at least from what Sean Clifford had to say and what we heard publicly outside of the roundtables, they didn't say anything. It was very disappointing because there was no backstory. There was no sort of like, they handled it how maybe Jason Stahl should have handled it in the first place. So what did you glean from Media Day?
Yeah, I think two things stand out, right? They don't want this to be a distraction. They're committed to that. And so they very much stuck to the script. Clearly that was something that was arranged and worked out beforehand. That's why they have media training. That's why they have, right? Like these guys are prepped for this. That's James Franklin. That's the players themselves. That there are media professionals who help them in these types of situations. I don't think that, again, this is kind of me reading between the lines. I don't think that Sean Clifford was aware of how the interview that he did and some of the conversations that he had would be presented. I don't think that was within his control. And so, the notion of being blindsided a little bit by that, I think is probably true. Okay. But okay. So the fact that it was pretty much a consistent, oh, well, we're here to talk about football. This is what we're looking forward to. I'm putting that aside, blah, blah, blah. Camp starts on Sunday. I get that. Okay. But what you did see, what I saw through their comments and specifically through James Franklin, is the idea that Sean Clifford would want to be an advocate for increasing student athlete benefits was consistent, right? Like that was something that more or less they were behind, right? Of James Franklin talking about the changing landscape. I wrote about it this morning. the changing landscape of college football and college athletics, and how there's an imbalance between SEC schools carrying 17 programs versus Big Ten schools that have 30 plus. And how, like, you know, kind of something's got to give, and wanting to push the ball forward on how football is treated, right? For a variety of reasons, I think makes sense. I think that that's something that James Franklin understands. I think that that's something that Sean Clifford, even if he had to talk about, hey, I don't want to talk about this, I'm going to talk about football. Even if that's the case, there's no question that they are proponents of that general movement. It's just a matter of, and through all the reporting that came out after the fact, after last Friday, the question is just, how do you get there? Right. Like, that's the desire is not in question. That is an objective, that is an aim and a goal of Sean Clifford and apparently many of his teammates. It's understood. This isn't rocket science, right? Like, there's nothing. The NIL is a big step towards that. This has been brewing for decades of players coalescing around the idea that, hey, we're in this, sacrificing our bodies and our well-being after we're done playing. And again, trust me,
not to make it too much of a sympathetic point and to go too far, but also mental health, the stress of being a football player and only being allowed to focus on football, like the hyper focus and the stress of performance. That's why they have counselors now at schools of dealing with athlete mental stress, and that goes across all sports. It does, especially individual ones where you are not a part of a team.
It does. I just think that the veil has been lifted by and large among specifically men's basketball and football players, that they are the revenue generators. That's it. This entire system is built upon the revenue that they generate. And so they're saying to themselves, wait a second, why does golf get scholarships? Why does you name it, the swimming and diving, all of these other sports that are supported by the revenue generated from football and men's basketball, they're saying to themselves, okay, well, this is coming at our expense now. This is coming at our all of the inhibitions, all of the hurdles and the roadblocks legally that were in the way have more or less been removed. Okay. And so now the runway is clear. They can say, hey, look, I don't care if it's through a player advocacy committee, of which Sean Clifford is now on in the Big Ten, as directed by Kevin Warren, or if it's unionization. However, it doesn't matter. If this can be achieved without going to unionization and without changing the employer, quote unquote, employee excuse me, relationship. If you can keep it as a program and a student athlete relationship, fine, as long as it gets to a place where some concessions are made and some revenue is able to be split among these student athletes.
So let me ask you, because we got a bunch of stuff to get to today, but I do want to ask this on the front end. Seems that Media Day was a real success. Was it a success for Penn State? Would you call what happened yesterday a success? Considering, if it is, I don't think you can have a big success at a Media Day when your point is to say and do nothing.
I think that the things. So first of all, at these Media Days, it is the podium session for 15 minutes. Okay, so Big Ten Network airs all of the coaches at the podium for 15 minutes. They get up there. They're either painfully dull and boring. They're elusive, answering questions. Or they own it, right? And
3 questions. James Franklin answered 3 questions in 15 minutes.
No one has ever argued that James Franklin can't handle himself in front of a crowd, that he can't present himself in the best light. And so Yeah, he absolutely filibustered. He had by far the longest opening statement of anybody there, probably for that reason, right? He didn't want to have 10 questions on national television about this. And so what he ended up getting was a question about the defensive ends, Indiana football, and the defensive tackles. And so in that sense, the portion of the program most watched by most fans, that's a win. That's a win for James Franklin. That's a win for Penn State football. And then, go ahead.
I was just going to say, speaking of filibustering, we've done 25 minutes on 2 questions, so I do want to get to more stuff. But just finish up with your last point.
No, I was just going to say that when Sean Clifford, PJ Mustipher, and Jair Brown took to the BTN set, they also were great. They handled themselves really, really well. Jair Brown talking about his backstory, and PJ Mustipher, like even Sean Clifford, they all represented themselves very well. They didn't have to go down the rabbit hole of what all this, other distractive stuff is. And so largely, I think that was a win.
So we're not moving on from Sean Clifford. We're just moving on to a different question as Nate is recovering from a cold, I imagine.
Sinus
infection. You allowed to have those anymore? Anyway,
no,
OC Lion asks, what are your thoughts on why Sean Clifford returned for a 6th year? Could NIL earnings and improving his business be the real reason? He's certainly not an NFL draft prospect, at least not based on the on-field performance the last 2 seasons. So we've talked about this before, Nate. How many players have you ever met that are like, yeah, I'm definitely not going to the NFL? Like, I'm definitely never going to make it. 100% of them want to go there and will do everything possible to make it there. And if it means staying in college football for 6 years to prove that you can do it and that it was the circumstances, Sean Clifford's going to do that. It doesn't hurt that NIL is there. It doesn't hurt that he has these goals and probably has a little more mental flexibility than some guys who only see themselves as football players, that he's building these business ventures on his way out. But I imagine he thinks he's a football player and he's going to play quarterback for a while.
I think that is a safe assumption. I'm always fascinated, truly, by the conflict between Penn State fans taking pride in and feeling well represented by Penn State football players who do other things.
Yeah.
John Urschel and John Urschel.
Do you add Adam Brenneman in there now?
I'm kidding. I just look, there are lots of guys who do stuff beyond the football field.
Yeah.
And do so to great effect and to great representation of the football program and the university. And so that is taken pride in. But if anything happens where performance suffers or performance isn't what it's expected to be, look, Sean Clifford can't play much worse than he did in 2020 and some portions of 2021. And so the idea that this is going to be used against him as though he hasn't been locked in all summer and all spring it's just kind of absurd. Like it's an easy out to say what you want to say anyway, which is just that Sean Clifford couldn't get it done. That's it. It doesn't need to be that unionization and NIL took away from his focus. It didn't. He is creating a pathway and an avenue to, like, this should be celebrated that he has had the gumption to start this business and to be successful the way that he has with it, along with, honestly, his brother, Liam. Right? Like those are good things.
So when Greg and I talked, when all of this was very fresh earlier in the week, this does some of the parts of this story that we did not get any context on, and some of the relationship parts between James Franklin and Sean Clifford, I do think those have validity. If Sean was doing things behind his head coach's back after James Franklin has gone to bat for him multiple times and, staked part of his reputation on Sean Clifford being the starter at Penn State, does that create an ill will? Does that break some of the trust? That can be a part of the conversation, but I think James Franklin pretty much put a nail in that. As far as like, I'm an adult, I'm going to handle this. We're going to move past this. I support Sean Clifford. The end. Goodbye. Like, those questions were answered pretty quickly by Penn State being very professional about the whole thing and about, the united front that they presented. But I don't think it's out of the question to have those conversations. But Sean Clifford's here to be a quarterback, to back to the original question.
Yeah. No, I think look, did Sean Clifford increase the pressure on himself? Yes.
Yeah.
Does James Franklin have reason to be, look, regardless of what the private conversations were, there is very little question that this was done outside of the realm of Penn State's understanding, right? Institutionally. So that's James Franklin. And so that in itself is probably not, like, there's no argument. That's not the way to handle it. That's not in the best interest of having an open dialogue and, open streams of communication. But that's not to say that Sean Clifford hasn't voiced those opinions with James Franklin in the past, and that they haven't had those conversations in the past. I think very clearly that by all accounts, James Franklin, he's had conversations with Sean Clifford. Pat Kraft has had conversations with Sean Clifford, and now Kevin Warren, the commissioner of the Big Ten, has had conversation with Sean Clifford. So, yes, there is a football element that Sean Clifford is like, that's it. It's 100% of the deal of him being at Penn State. And the reality is, whether or not this NIL stuff or unionization stuff or any of that other stuff, it doesn't matter. He's going to be judged based on his performance.
Yeah.
Like, that's it.
That's the conversation. Now? That's the conversation too, is like, the winning and losing of football games is now at hand, which is your currency as a player, is being on the field and performing. So those ventures built off of that have to wait until you've done the winning and the losing. And this obviously happened earlier in the month, long before we got this close, and then came out now as kind of a retaliatory tactic. So it looks worse maybe than it was, but it also looks bad. Let's move on. Chester Copperpot, one of our favorites on the board. Not that we play favorites, but I love his questions. He has good questions. Franklin heaps some praise on Chop Robinson. Do you think he will be the best pass rushing threat for PSU this year? I kind of do. I love what I see from him on film, because I see a little more explosive strength. And there's fast and fluid, and I think that's more Adisa Isaac. I see a little more of that power through contact from Chop Robinson. Now, the funny thing is, Adisa is now listed at 250, and Robinson's closer to 240. So what do I know? But I think in the long run, Robinson has a very high ceiling because he's got a big frame, explosive. He can be strong. He can play with strength. Whether it happens at the beginning of the season or at the end of the year, I do think eventually he's going to be probably the lead guy out of this group from the best ability I see from the defensive end rotation.
The only counter I would make is that Franklin was asked about him and he answered about him, but then he also made sure to mention Adisa Isaac.
Right.
Wanted to, that's me reading between the lines, but to me, there was kind of very clearly a pushback of, oh, it's not just a by the way about Adisa. It's now this guy's like a big factor, and you need to have that conversation with him being on at least equal footing going into preseason camp.
I feel bad because I feel like every single time we have this conversation, I'm diminishing Isaac. And like part of it is,
we have to see. We don't know.
Exactly. I've seen him play football at Penn State, and I was largely looking at other players. Like, he did not force me to look at him. There were also some supremely talented players around him. So what is he now, presumably, post-injury, in the final form of what he's going to be? That's, I don't know. I don't know. There's just more upside. There's more tangible, tantalizing upside with Chop Robinson because of all the newness, which I always get in trouble for doing.
I just, I don't think it was accidental that Franklin made sure before the bowl game to bring up Adisa Isaac. Like that was purposeful. He was genuinely excited at Adisa Isaac having made the strides that he did. And it offered a vision for the future. Now, granted, this is well before Chop Robinson ever came into the equation this spring, but it to me, that was a pronouncement of, hey, we haven't talked about this guy all year, obviously, because he's not part of the picture here. He's hurt.
Yeah.
But the way that he looks coming back at this point, right, which was December, is very encouraging. He's had another 8 months since then. And, you know, I think that largely speaking, all of the feedback that's come out of the Lash building about him has been overwhelmingly positive.
Yeah, it's the biggest. I think the defensive end position is one of the biggest ifs on the roster of if those three young guys, and Adisa is not young, but if those three guys that we don't know a lot about on this field, if they work out, if that happens, Penn State's defense can be elite, I think, is the upper end of their ability. Want to get to this quickly. Finish up.
Well, no, I was just gonna say, like, isn't it interesting though that Franklin said from the podium how big of a question mark Mike linebacker is and seeing who can lead the defense, but did not say that about the ends or the tackles, which to me it speaks volumes. I think that they think that they have more than enough talent there that's ready to go to make an impact this season.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. Have you been looking for a reliable source of Penn State football tickets? Jim at TixmanJim.com, formerly PSUTixman.com, has been running his ticket exchange in Wilmington, Delaware for over 25 years. Every buyer is handled with courtesy, respect, and every ticket purchased is guaranteed. Proceeds are used to fund the PSU AA Chapter Scholarship Fund and the PSU Levi Lamb Fund for athletic scholarships. Get your home opener Ohio U tickets, your Ohio State stripe-out tickets. They put those back-to-back on me, and that trips me up every time. Minnesota homecoming, whiteout, all the tickets you want. Go to www.tixmanjim.com. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see tixmanjim.com at the bottom of the screen, or email Jim at tixmanjim@gmail.com. Give him a call, 302-521-8380. Call 302-521-8380. So, Tixman Jim, you want to check out some of these games that we're talking about? You can get your tickets there. Okay, next question as I transition smoothly because I am a professional. There has Old Frog asks, there has been some talk about the offense using more tempo to disrupt what other teams do on defense. Do you see them utilizing a no-huddle concept? If so, how much? Great question. They'll never be an all no-huddle up-tempo team because that is as much of a gimmick as anything else. If you're going up tempo all the time, you cannot be super effective at playing football at that speed all the time. And there are times where it's not good for you. Secondarily, you need to know the offense to go up tempo. So yes, I think strategically they can use up tempo this year if everything Sean Clifford has said is true. And Mike Yurcich and what they've said of, we know the offense now. So Sean Clifford doesn't have to do the check with me as much. He can make some of the decisions. Then you can go up tempo. Anything else in that conversation, the context you want to add to that particular point, or disagree?
Just what Clifford said yesterday about mastery of the offense, right? That the year two is where you go from just learning and absorbing into refining and owning, the nuances of what the offense is. And so, would I expect an offensive coordinator of Mike Yurcich's pedigree to employ that sometimes when advantageous? Yeah, definitely.
There's just I think there's gonna be more options on the table this year. It's not gonna be what it was last year where we've got X and Y and we'll alternate between those two things, and then each week we're searching for something that works. It's going to be, what is the best possible tactic we can use this week, and can we take advantage of that? There'll be more of those things.
And some of them will fail.
Right. That's a great point.
Clear here. Some of them won't work out. It's just a question of, will there be a dagger, right? The loss of a limb, right? They were so pigeonholed last year in things that they did effectively, despite trying such a bevy of other options. They just didn't work. And so this year they should be more effective in some of those avenues.
So I'll kind of break it down pretty basically here, and then I want to get to the next question. But to what the specifics of what I'm talking about, the bread and butter of 65% of college spread offenses is inside zone. So last year Penn State ran inside zone, and they ran their gap schemes, power and counter, and that was it. That's what they could run. So if you know what's coming, well, they're definitely not going to run too much mid zone or outside zone, or they're not going to run any trap, and they don't have these things mastered, whether it's the power pitch that they like to do with the quarterback, where they've got the running back flaring out for a pitch, but the blocking is set up for the quarterback. If they're not doing any of those things because they can't do them, they cannot execute those plays, then you have less options. That's what we're saying, is like, in the passing game, they'll have a better understanding of the passing concepts and being able to implement them on a more regular basis. They'll have more and we focus on the running game, but it's all of it. It's the whole picture put together. So they're not going to be, we come into this game, we're running inside zone, because that is a thing that can work against this team, and that's what we're going to do. Anyway, next thing. I forgot I said I was setting that up, and then we're moving on, and then I just sat there.
I'm trying to shut up.
Mark Breer asks on Twitter, Pat Kraft seems like the man. Nate, you've talked to him. Is he the man?
Yeah. Yep. No, he is. He's a wholly engaging and enjoyable conversation. And so if I'm gleaning from, is he the man, what that means, my interpretation of the man, he's a pretty cool dude. I think that he's got a bright future for making the connections with, honestly, everybody. Like, he's a people person. And so I think that will behoove him and very much be to his benefit and to the benefit of Penn State athletics moving forward in a variety of areas.
Next up, it's our friend Nuke.
My man.
He's gonna get 2 questions on here because he had a couple of good ones, and they're good to break us up here just a couple of minutes towards the end of the show. Nuke asks, what are the top 3 sports movies of all time? Nate, I'll let you go first before I embarrass myself with my picks.
No, you have to go first because I got to think about this.
Okay,
I'm starting from scratch here.
So here's the thing. I'll tell a story. Okay, this might illustrate it better. I don't watch sports movies, so like the ones I've seen, like I think everyone's seen Remember the Titans because it's not about sports, not about football. So great movie, irrespective of whether it's about sports or not. And then I'm getting into like The Longest Yard and Remember the Titan, or I'm sorry, I already said that one. What's the like dodgeball, I guess, would you say? Rudy, I don't know. I don't. So yeah. I used to work with Penn State, voice of Penn State football, Steve Jones, on his show. I was his producer, and I would always feel embarrassed because he would throw out these references to like Major League and Caddyshack and Bull Durham and I haven't seen any of these movies. So I would sit there and just like stare at him, ruining the show. And then I would, because I was like 25, and I would be like, what is he talking about? He's dumb. And then I realized, no, I'm an idiot. I've never seen any of these things. I'm on a sports channel, and I've never seen any of these movies. So it's a point of, it's a sore point for me when it comes to sports movies, because it's kind of an embarrassing thing.
I think it sounds a little bit like a point of pride, though. I think you like the fact that you don't watch those movies.
Possibly, but also
I don't hate it. I have no problem with it. I've never seen Star Wars, any of them. In fact, I think I've seen one Marvel movie.
Okay, now we just can't be friends.
I know, it's over. But for I'm gonna weigh in here because this is definitive.
Okay.
Happy Gilmore is the best sports movie of all time.
Golf. We have some biases here.
Caddyshack is number 2.
Okay.
And that's it. Those are it. Those are
okay. So neither of us had good answers. That's good to know.
Weekend at Bernie's. Weekend at Bernie's for speedboat racing. Does that count?
So Nuke asks a real question, as he always wants to throw something in there about the safeties. Realistically, how many safeties can be on the field at once? Is there a way to sneak the 12th one on there? You know, that's a great question. It depends on whether the refs are paying attention or not. But the real answer is, I think last year I saw 4 safeties on the field for Manny Diaz. So 2 regular safeties, your field and your boundary. And then in a sub package, you could have your Sam linebacker striker position is a safety body. And then you substitute the Will for a safety. So you've got 4 safeties, a Mike linebacker, defensive ends, and corners. It's a lot of safeties. And if Joey Porter Jr. is out there, you've got a safety body at corner. So 5.
You know that he's dying laughing that you just answered that earnestly, right?
Yeah, of course. I have a tick. I can't handle it. I know something. I gotta share it.
What you said, yeah.
Okay. Pocono 570. Who are your top 3 surprise players on offense and defense that you think are going to turn some heads during fall camp? Mustipher's now at the top of my list. If he's healthy and he's out there and he's making plays and holding up against double teams, he's the number 1 guy on my list as far as that's a surprise player turning ahead for me. Then it's going to be whether it's one of the Mike linebackers, because that's the one everyone's going to be looking at. Anybody else on your radar?
On the defensive side of the ball?
Either way, is he saying offense and defense? Those are the guys at the top of my head. So the problem is, like, our surprise player list now includes about 20 players at this point in the offseason. Right. So I'm just updating with the guys that I think, given what James Franklin said yesterday, those are the guys now that I'm focusing on, whether they can turn heads or not, because they're important.
Yeah, I think the problem with the question is we've been talking about them as surprises since April, right?
Yeah.
Or before that. And so, like, does Hunter Nourzad count? Probably not, because the expectation is that he's going to step in and play. But do I think he'll be good, better than expected? Yes. So that would be one for me. I think Katron Allen's going to be a surprise, honestly. I do. I think that there's enough reason to believe that he's ready to play. And just because I talk so much about Nick Singleton, and we talk about Nick Singleton all the time, that's another guy that will probably surprise some people in that he's a little overlooked.
Yeah.
Just given the amount of attention that Nick gets.
Making some plays. And by the way, coming up tomorrow is our running back preview and our preseason primer. We're getting through running backs, and then it's just tight ends before we move on to the defense. And we got to get moving because, training camp is super close. So we need to get the preseason in before the preseason is over. Glad you mentioned Hunter Nourzad, because PSU 9500 XPLG. Sorry, it just sounded like a desktop monitor name. Yo, T. Frank, love the show. Probably shouldn't be teasing him about his name if he's being so nice. Especially about the recent O-line show you did. But where's love for my man Sal, meaning Sal Wormley? He was a starter last year before injury, which is coming up on a year at this point from training camp. Have 5 grown men up front. I start to agree that Sal easing himself into a rotation there. Also, is Landon Tangwell the primary backup at both tackles? Yeah, I don't know what to expect from Sal Wormley, truthfully, because of the injury and because of the depth. Like, the depth and the competition there. I don't know if we didn't talk about him enough on our O-line preview. He's definitely part of the battle there. But like what you just said, Hunter Nourzad, everyone is expecting him. He transferred here for a reason.
Yeah.
So where does Wormley fit into that picture?
I'm going in at least to preseason camp with the mindset that it's an open competition. I really do think that those guys are going to battle. I might give Nourzad a little bit of an edge right now, but I don't think that Sal Wormley's out of it at all.
Yeah.
And I think that ultimately both will play. So like that's what you want. You want to have 6. You want
What
to have
about
6 starters, right?
what about Tangwall? We've kind of anointed him the left guard starter.
Yep.
But he was also not a consistent participant in spring practice. And, might be the most talented player on the line, but he's one of the youngest. Does Wormley have an ability to take, it doesn't have to be that Penn State's starting their 5 the entire game. They have rotated, especially guards, in on a regular basis some years.
Yeah.
Is that also open? I tend to think no, but I also have a very biased view of I'm very high on Landon Tangwall.
I think that if you talk to the coaches, they would always tell you that nothing's off the table.
Right.
And part of Landon Tangwall's attractiveness, right, what makes him so great for Phil Troutline is that he can play all over the place.
Yep.
That's a great tool to have, because what if that's the case, right? What if it's the case that Hunter Nourzad and Sal Wormley, neither one of them really quite fit at right guard? Excuse me. Maybe at that point you make a switch. I just don't think that's the case. Like, I don't think that's what their preference is.
Yeah. When it comes to the tackle position, we've talked about this a couple of times, but let's just review it. That Olafashanu, Caden Wallace, left tackle, right tackle. I called Tangwall the main backup to those guys because he was the main backup last year. He is, again, one of the most talented players on the roster, and the guys behind him really haven't done enough to identify themselves as players at this point, where you've got Ibrahim Traore and Jimmy Christ. Are either of those guys gonna have something to say about that? And is it a good plan? Like, is it a good plan coming in with Tangwall being the 3 of your 5 players on the offensive line, at least in the 2 deep somewhere?
You have to have a break glass in case of emergency, but that doesn't mean that you do it without there being an emergency.
Right. Let's move on to Sykim. You know why I like Sykim's questions, Nate? It's because he's the best. First off, he's a very nice person, very kind person. Secondly, he basically does my promos for me. Like, he promotes the hell out of the BWI Daily Edition. He says, great interview with Dwayne, and that's Dwayne Brown of 2/10 Speed and Agility, who came on the show on Monday talking to us about Pittsburgh athletes he's trained all the way from Miles Sanders, Aaron Donald, to commits coming up in the class of 2023 with Tammy Robinson and Lamont Payne, giving us an inside look at those players. So, hope you have him back sometime. Any sense on what he compares to Penn State and their strength and conditioning program? Any sense that college athletes can improve speed by much, maybe a 10th? Improvement makes a difference in the game and the NFL draft. That was an area where I think it's the speed improvement is about the form of running, where if you don't know how to run, then you're wasting efficiency. And sprinting is very different than jogging. If you watch some of those highlights, if you watch guys that are doing speed training, there's this drill where they fall forward and then they start sprinting. And that's to give you the correct body lean when you're running. And that does translate to the field as well. If you're an efficient athletic player with the right body lean and you can control your center of gravity, that does make you more fluid and more explosive. There's something that there's this whole conversation about muscle fibers that we don't need to get into when it comes to explosive athleticism. That comes some from speed and agility training and some from strength training. But when it comes to Penn State and his view of things, I think he does kind of tailor what he does. It's very similar to Penn State and what they're looking for in terms of athletic movement skills, movement in space, offensive linemen, all the way to receivers, all being athletic and being able to run, because football is now a game of space and you want to be able to reach any point of the field you need to execute your assignment, whether it's a pull block or a go route. So I do think that they align pretty well. But he also mentioned, like, yeah, if I've got a guy that's going to Penn State, we start training to tailor to what they're looking for so they're ready to go when they get there. You good?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I probably should have popped you off screen so you could die in peace. But
yeah, if I don't get water, it's over.
All right. ZFresh05 says, what are the remaining positions you expect Penn State to fill in the class of 2023? What positions do you think they should fill? So this is tough because the defense is solid A, borderline A+. They obviously missed on some defensive tackles per the calendar. Like that happens once a year, it seems. The offense is in a sticky situation. They have the potential to have an elite offensive line class, but they do need to get one guy across the finish line. So you got to add an offensive lineman. That's one. You got to add at least one receiver. And I know we have this conversation about every other position. And do you need to take a quarterback this year because you've got two from last year and guys are going to transfer. And here's the other thing at the receiver position when we're talking about, do you need to take more than one this year because you had four last year? And I'm not trying to, kill the plant before it grows, but are you expecting three of the four receivers in this class of 2022 to all work out? To all be significantly impactful players at some point in their career, whether they become stars or reliable players? I think if you look at the math, and this is not going into individual players and their profiles, that's not likely. That's why you get a lot of players. That's why you go in and you get multiple players at a position that needs volume. That's the exact problem that Penn State had on the offensive line. And if you just say, okay, this year we're not going to get anybody, and then next year something bad happens and you also don't, now you got 2 years stacked on top of each other. You can plug holes through the transfer portal, yes, but you don't want to have to do that. You want to find your superstars from the college level, developing in your program, and make them great. And you can't do that unless you're getting the talent necessary. So what that means for the class of 2023, in my opinion, is they have gotten some upsets early in the class. They're going to need to get some more to finish this out to have the projection as it was before some of the decommitments and misses. You need to find a quarterback. For the same thing I just said about the receivers. What if neither quarterback turns to be the guy from 22? That's a possibility. You need to get a quality quarterback. So that means you need to get an upset there. You need to get another receiver. And then if you want to flip a guy and get a really big win, some of the guys that you were in with before, if you can continue those relationships and flip one of those priority receivers that you had previously, if that's on the table, that's something else that has to happen for this class. So it's the obvious positions of need. And I think that if you're saying we're okay, we're going to pass on any of these, those are losses and misses for 23. That's not like we're fine. I still believe that if you want to compete at that highest level, there are no excuses. There's no, we're fine this year. Maybe every once in a while that can happen, but you can't go in with one receiver and not get any of your top targets. Like that just can't happen. Zach says, with week 1 Thursday night at Purdue approaching fast and with the recipe for Penn State to start off 1-0, a very hostile crowd. What is the recipe to start off 1-0 in a very hostile crowd? Does a Thursday night game affect the players in any way aside from less preparation time? I'll just start with that last part. That's the beauty of having a week 1 game early is that you don't. You can adjust for that. Nate, anything you got to say there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that first of all, they will tailor their practice approach to the game, right? So as it is already, they started Saturday morning in Wisconsin last year. Game week, quote unquote, started on Wednesday the week before. And so it's an extension. And so in this case, because it's a Thursday game, I would guess that game week, quote unquote, starts on Monday or Sunday, right, of the week and a half prior to that game. No, I mean, look, like there was no debate about that yesterday. That it's going to be hostile. It's going to be a tough game. That's a tough environment. Purdue's they are worthy of concern. That's tough.
Yeah.
Nobody debates that. It's just a matter of, can Penn State go into it with the same, mature approach that they took to that game at Wisconsin last year? That was a tough game at Wisconsin. Like, winning that game remains a big deal.
Yeah.
Wisconsin is good and is a consistently good program, particularly at home. And so if Penn State goes into this game against Purdue with the same mindset, the same attitude, and the same approach, Penn State has the advantage in terms of its depth and its breadth of talent.
Yep.
It's just a matter of being able to implement and execute those advantages to pull out a win.
So I think we both agree on this. Score points and early.
Yeah.
So it's always easier to take the crowd out of it when you don't give them any hope. And if you go up early in the game, then you got to sustain that. But here's the other thing. If you don't, then you have to play the game. Like, you have to play Purdue. So the resiliency to get through the emotional surge at the beginning, and if you can cut it off and you can stem that tide, do that. Put up 14 points in the first quarter and see if they still want to be there once the rest of the game is played. So, and they will, by the way, they will. So you've got to be there for 4 quarters, but it's always easier when you take the wind out of the sails and you don't let people get into that froth with early success and early excitement.
I think that there's a good possibility that Penn State has to withstand an early deficit.
Yeah.
I do. I mean, honestly, Wisconsin should have been up by a touchdown or 2 in that game last year, but they weren't. And so it ended up working out. Penn State missed some chances. Wisconsin missed some chances. But just the way that these games tend to go, I'm thinking, Ohio State's been in a few of these road conference Thursday night games to start the season. And in a couple of them, I think at Minnesota and I think one at Indiana.
I
think Ohio State was trailing at the half or somewhere in that vicinity.
Yeah, they were either trailing by a touchdown, and I think in the Indiana game, it was like 28-21. So a lot of points, a lot of things not going their way early in the game, especially defensively.
Yeah, but you got to be able to weather that, withstand that, and then let the horses take over, right? Yeah. Like in the second half, that's where they talk about it all the time. The better, more well-rounded, deeper, stronger, faster teams tend to be able to, when all of the other factors are in favor of the underdog, home, frenzy crowd, national TV, all of those things, they dissipate. They dissipate in the second half, and that's where you try to win.
So last question, and I like this one. We're going to end on this one because it gives a bright light for the future. Who in the incoming class of 2022 are your early picks for fan favorites? Nate, I'm going to let you go first because I have a very specific player in mind and a very specific reason in mind.
Yeah, I have 2.
Okay. You give them both.
Drew Allar and Nick Singleton. Can you believe it? Can you believe I went in that direction?
And I'm going to go the opposite way. Okay. And I'll pick Kaden Saunders. And here's why. Hear me out. I understand that the quarterback and the running back, they get the ball a lot, all those things. Everyone loves a good receiver because who's on the other end of those bombs, right? Who's the guy getting open and who's standing alone in the end zone? The receiver. I always wanted to play receiver for that reason. Secondly, there is the idea of fan favorite as only being about play on the field, and that's 95% of it. But the other 5%, Saquon Barkley is beloved because he's good-looking and charismatic.
Yep.
And Kaden Saunders is good-looking and charismatic. Dani Dennis Sutton is good-looking and charismatic. And I'm not saying that Drew Allar and Nick Singleton aren't, but I know right away that those two guys, Dani and Kaden, they got that stuff that makes you want to put them on camera. I already want to get, I got Dani on the show. I wanted him here because he's not only a 5-star, but he's also a guy that people are interested in. They're drawn to. So when it comes to fan favorite, marketing campaign, NIL, I think those guys are going to do very well for themselves as long as they produce on the football field. So I think you got that level, that little secret sauce that made KJ Hamler, everybody love him. I see that part in Kaden Saunders, and that's another reason they're compared, not just because of their game and where they play.
That's fair. Look, there's going to be a lot. That's the bottom line.
Right.
The class of 2022 has a bunch of dudes who people are going to rally around. they're just gonna like them. They're just likable guys. So.
And Dani said on the show, like, yeah, I like having my picture taken. Why wouldn't you when you look like Dani? So if you like the camera and the camera likes you, you're gonna be a fan favorite. So that'll do it today for the BWI Daily Edition. Our mailbag show is complete. You have done a phenomenal job. You, my friend, who has watched the show all the way through to completion. You who has submitted questions. Thank you very much. And also, thanks, Nate. You did a great job.
I thought you were actually talking to me about making it through without being dead. So
yeah, you're dead on a bachelor party. I think that's what you're doing. You're working today, but you're on location doing something. I don't know what's going on. I'm assuming you're somewhere fancy doing something fun when you got an A-frame behind you.
No, I just came to read. Quiet contemplation.
So this is a seaside is what this is. All right, let's get out of here. That's the BWI Daily Edition. Subscribe on YouTube, podcast. We'll be back with our wrap-up of the week. We're looking at running backs.